Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right, we're recording. Jeremy here again, and here with Yuan, good friend. Who actually, Yuan, you've been here in the neighborhood in North Philadelphia longer than I have. You were one of the earlier people that I met.
That is true. I still remember the first time I met you, Jeremy. I thought you were like 12. I'm like, who is this guy? What's this Asian guy doing here?
Well, that's because you eye each other when you're like, oh, what's this Asian person doing here, right? And
Exactly. Like, what are you? Yeah. I still remember the first time. I will never forget that, Jeremy.
yeah,
I'll always remember.
Yuan, you were one of the first person that I thought of when this crazy stuff happened, and yeah, I wanted to hear how you're feeling. Honestly, like I told some other people, I just kind of I just put it to the side.
Yeah.
I didn't even though I was like, well, this is gonna become a thing, you know. And then I didn't even bother to look at the news, and
Yeah.
later and let it hit me. There's some dysfunction there about that, but I want to hear how you're feeling, and yeah, well, you know, and the
Yeah.
Asian sisters, you know.
Um, I'm extremely affected by it. I think more than I thought. There's been so much, so many things that have been triggered and brought up through it all. And I think the part of me is thankful because I do think that the Lord is a part of that process for me, so I don't think this is random where I'm just sitting in there like conjuring up issues. And when I heard about it was during the work week, and work has been extremely stressful. So didn't really think about it, didn't really go into the details. And then when you actually messaged me on Friday, it was like I really feel like the Lord used that too to be like, you know, you can talk about it. Like you can think about it. Like this is not like there are people who like care, because I'm so used to people like not caring about Asian issues, where it's like it's just kind of like, well, it's not black or white, so let's just keep it moving, which is another deep source of pain for me. And then I spent Friday night, I just was so incredibly sad and like angry, and then I spent pretty much all of Saturday. I was listening to I can't remember that Asian American like Christian collaborative. Like I can't remember the name of it, but they had done like they had spoken about it like right after, like I guess the day after. Then I was listening to a lecture by my former sociology professor. This was before the incident, but he had this Asian man on the show, or not the show, in the lecture, kind of talking about some of these issues, and it was just so intense. And my biggest thing I think through all of this is my own like Asian identity. It's brought up so much of that. And I know that's something I talked a lot about with you in the past. And just so much. It's like just I don't know if it's like generations of pain, or for me, I'm 37, just for whatever reason, it was like this incident or this moment like shook me, because I knew things were happening. It's all over the news and like, and it's just, I think for me, it was very much like it just showed me how I would just check out to like just to deal with life, just to kind of be like, well, it's fine, we're just gonna keep moving. And then when this happened, I felt like it's like I couldn't ignore it anymore. This is real and this is happening. And it took me a lot of courage, but I did actually talk about it with my dad, with my limited
Wow.
Mandarin. I mean, I didn't know the word racism or, like a lot of but I really tried to
You
like,
say limited, but your Mandarin's pretty good actually to me. So like,
I mean, limited in like racial vocabulary, but, and I mean, it was good. I mean, I didn't really engage in it very much, but, for me, it was helpful to just, I mean, I started to cry when I talked to him, just like being honest with him about my pain. And, he just was like, oh, I didn't really hear about it. And I was like, well, Dad, like, do you feel safe? Like, because I'm worried for you, and he's like, oh, yeah, I don't really go anywhere. And he just kept saying, like, I know this is like really bad. And then he was worried about my safety, but I think it's just because I'm in West Philly. I don't think it has anything to do with what happens, but but yeah, so I think those are some of my initial thoughts
Yeah.
that's come up. And I think at the end of the day, this is such like a divine opportunity, to really take a look at Asian issues in our country, which is usually ignored. So,
And I mean, layer on top of that, you are you you are an immigrant, right? You're not exactly second generation. What is that? 1.5?
I think I'm 1.5.
1.5
Yeah.
generation. And then you're also a woman, and
Mhm.
your relationship to, I mean, a lot of the people I've talked to, their relationship to the faith community is different. And then they end up thinking, when they think about Asian, immediately think about Asian, Chinese, say Chinese church, and that,
Oh, yeah.
and then maybe sort of prophetic critique of that circles, and
Hmm.
in its relationship, in how it's shaped the racial identity and relationship to other racial groups.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's a lot of where my mind has gone too. But I just think about you being different. So you're 1.5. You moved here young. You're Asian woman. You're not growing up in that faith community in the same way. With your
Yeah.
parents, and your relationship to family is different, and you are working in a non-Asian, Chester, right? You're still in Chester. No.
Yep. Stonechester, predominantly African American, Black. Yeah.
And so I just think about your experiences, who you are, and how you're relating to this must be really, yeah. I know it's going to be an experience, So that's why I want to hear you, um, yeah, because I don't know what it's like to be 1.5. I
Yeah.
imagine I watch it. In terms of, yeah, how to say it this way. When I grew up, second generation, you're already American, and you're trying to,
Right.
you know, you're sort of awkwardly ashamed of your Asianness, or when it's too exotic, Chinese or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
But you started off from the other frame
Hmm.
and come here, and then you're like, probably it's just much harder. I don't know.
It is. I think I think the fact that you're bringing up the difference between 1.5 and 2 is so interesting because I don't really talk about that. It's like, because it's not really something that, I don't know, that's just kind of like the forefront of my mind, but you're absolutely right. One of my biggest struggles um, is the fact that, my parents, brought me here, which I think is a gift from the Lord, because I have all these opportunities and like, I feel like I can really be who God made me to be here. I think in China, there's just no space for me, for someone like me, at least the way that I imagine China. I know now it's more liberal and more, open, but, I definitely would have been shunned for who I am and molded into, the kind of mold of an Asian woman in China. And especially with my mom's family, who are wealthier, business people. And I mean, I just would have been like, they probably had to like put me in boarding school or something because I'm like none of those things, and I'm really outspoken. So I think, yeah, I think growing up, the biggest thing with my family was, my mom really believed that the most loving thing she can do for me is to assimilate me
Right.
and to make me be as white as she possibly could, and so there was a lot of shame in being Chinese in a lot of ways, feeling like I wouldn't fit in. Um, and I
Did you learn,
didn't fit in because I didn't,
you learn,
every school I went to didn't have, I was kind of one of the only Asian people, you know?
Did you have, what age did you come over here, and did you have to learn English really fast, or?
Yeah, so I came here when I was 6. I went through ESL. I learned English, I believe, in like a year or two. Like, because I know as a child, it's really easy to learn English. It's so much easier. And so yeah, so that's what I had to do. But I mean, I was bullied a lot for being Asian, and of course, it's like I don't really talk about that. But for me, a huge part of my identity is so my parents became citizens, and because I was under 14, I just became a citizen. It was very symbolic when my mom had to pick between Chinese citizenship or American citizenship because she couldn't keep both, where she, handed over her Chinese passport. And from that moment, it was like we're American. And I know my parents worked so hard to become American, and so I think I take that for granted a lot because it's just, I see myself as like American. But it came at a huge cost, in a lot of ways. And so I think that shift of like I'm super proud of China and like where I come from, but I don't really I feel like I'm an imposter, because I'm not like I feel like I'm like too American, and so it's like I'm always in between worlds. And but growing up I was indoctrinated a lot of traditional Chinese Confucian, like those type of mentalities. So I just feel very lost, I think, most of the time in my life. And then when I became a Christian, that was like another layer of like identity, where it's like my mom was very against me being Christian for a long time. I never went to an Asian church. I think I visited one or two, but I just feel like I didn't fit in. Because another issue I have is I feel uncomfortable with like Asian people because I feel like I'm not Asian enough. So then I go to non-Asian churches and like I stick out. So it's just like there's no
That's so
good.
interesting. That's so interesting because maybe it's like you're not Asian American. Like the story doesn't resonate with you because when you break out your Chinese, you
Huh?
are so on point. You're like really fast and you're really good. I mean, I can understand a lot of what you're saying, but you're like really good. So then you're like on that level, you're super like
That's true.
it's so interesting how that works, right? And then no one would look at you and think second generation, sorry, 1.5.
1.5.
I think they look at you and they would think second generation. Um,
For sure. I mean, absolutely. People are like, oh, you're an ABC, right? I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a CBC. I don't know. Like, I don't know.
right.
Chinese born Chinese.
But you're, I think you did really effectively assimilate, probably.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know how to describe it, but you're very unique compared to a lot of the people I've met. Maybe because I don't meet a lot of people that came over when they were 6, that kind of thing, or
Mm,
and just culturally speaking,
yeah.
I don't even know how to describe this, but when you describe that, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You're not, you don't, how, I mean, you could describe the story of different people and say that, but it's just like, probably just like, almost, here's my impression, and this is probably off, but it's almost like you're more American than a lot of Asian Americans ish. I feel,
Okay.
I feel like, I mean, I could be wrong. Again, maybe this is just a me thing.
Well, like, I guess my question is like, what do you mean by that? Like,
I don't know what I mean. Again, I don't know. But then on the other level, you're probably more you're more Asian than
yeah,
a typical Asian American. I don't
yeah.
know. Like you're both more and less in a certain way.
And that was always one of my constant struggles being who I am, because when I go back to China, it's like, oh my gosh, you're this American person, But then here, I feel like from day to day, I don't. It's interesting because no one would say to me like you're a fob, you're not American. Like no one would ever say that. But somehow it's not, it's like somehow I'm not quite there. Whatever that there is, you know what I mean? It's just I'm not quite. And I was sharing this with someone. I was like, because I'm mainly around non-Asians, not even by choice. That's just my life, you know. And it's like people get very, I don't want to say it, but people get uncomfortable when I will kind of put a spotlight on myself as an Asian American.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, I'll never, you know, one of my coworkers, and we're really good friends, and he's just like, I don't see you as Asian. You're just Yuan. And I want to be like, what are you talking? Like, how do you not see? It's like someone looking at my dogs and being like, I don't see pit bulls. They're just dogs. Which is a lie. Like, of course you're thinking they're pit bulls, you know? Like, so that's why when he said that, it was like offensive to me. I know he meant it like in a positive way, like, oh, you're just like everyone else. But I'm like, but I'm not, and it's okay if you
Yeah.
see that I'm Asian, you know?
Yeah. Is that I mean your name, right? Your name is much more Asian, for example. I mean, it's not like an assimilated name like Mary.
Sarah, Amy,
Um,
whatever.
and I'm curious too, you know, like because you know, it's funny. My mom met you,
Oh
and
yeah, your
so
mom is so sweet.
she'll
Yeah,
ask about you. She's like, "How's Rian?"
yeah.
And I'm like, "Huh? Who are you
You're
talking
like
about?"
who?
You know, Yuan, you know, the girl that I met when I visited Philadelphia, Yuan.
Yeah,
You know, you,
right.
you know, and you,
Yep,
of course, you say it as a, or, and then you probably have to tell people that write it out how to pronounce it.
yep.
Yuan,
All the
I know that you're pretty flexible about it, right? Yuan, you know, um, how to stress it.
time.
Um,
Just don't. I mean, people will call me Juan because like they can't process the Y. I'm like, I'm not a Latino man, you know. And then I've gotten yawn, and I was like, there's no W, you know. It's one syllable, so I try to be really compassionate, you know, where I'm like, I don't. I mean, at work, some people still call me Miss Yang, and I'm like, that's a T. There, you can't mistake it a T with a Y, like. But I think because it's different, you know, people it's like they can't process it, you know. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you're because you had mentioned that well, I just keep thinking about this Asian American women, you know, and
Yep.
it felt very just invisible and felt very sort of just like maybe Asian American women are not. How often do we see them just highlighted in broader culture? And it's a thing when it comes to women just in general, you know, men
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
out
Yeah.
there, women, you know, and then we have to have a feminist movement to give women or to recognize women's voices and place and but then you know add on the Asian layer of how that's viewed
Yeah.
and then but you mentioned that you tend to be outspoken and so that
hmm
may I imagine that kind of and I do think that we see fewer outspoken Asian women
hmm
like and I wonder how that relates to your relationship to other Asian women, but also just to this cultural moment. I mean, because it's um, that yeah, even just as I say outspoken Asian woman, the women that immediately come to my mind, I feel like oftentimes they do feel. I don't want to put words in their mouths, but it seems like I've heard them feel just that they know they're out. That they know that there's a pain there. They know that they're different. Um,
hmm Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think as I've gotten to know myself better, you know, which is a lifetime process, I can be very outspoken when it's for the well-being of other people. But when it comes down to my own well-being, I am not. And I really had to reflect on that And, I know that usually when I am outspoken, I don't think people expect me to be when they meet me, because I don't know really how people perceive me, but I think part of it is like an Asian woman, usually quiet, submissive, that's just the stereotype. And then when I will call people out, I'm even at work, I'm like, do your job. I don't say it like that, but I'm not just going to let things go by because we're dealing with the lives of children, you know? But I think for myself, I was reflecting on how growing up, in the family that I did, I really couldn't speak up for myself. And I think part of it was I didn't even know what to speak up for myself about, because it was like the rules were my sole purpose in life. And this is very common. I hear this all the time among Asian, my generation. It's like, is to live out my parents' dream. There's no sense of self, there's no sense of advocacy, self advocacy. And so I'm not sure at what point I developed the sense of I'm going to speak out for others. I think because of just I was always interested in like the underdog, marginalized, always was involved with that, and I think that really came from a deep place within me from the Lord. But when it came, I mean, even to this day, Jeremy, I struggle with speaking up for myself in situations, and that's across the board. I think, but now that I'm more aware of it, I can actually process it, and I talk to my therapist about it a lot. Because I think that disconnect is very profound, and I think a lot of it comes from my programming as a child. It's
Right.
just don't, and I think my mom saw me as very rebellious because there were times when I would, but whenever I did, I was like severely punished for it,
And we need
Um,
precedents. We need precedents for doing it or out there so that we can imitate them. But we also need to have built up the muscles in ourselves to do it and not see myself as being rebellious when I do it. Right. When I speak up,
right.
if I condition to feel like, oh man, I'm being rebellious at this moment to say something, to advocate for myself, when it maybe is a good thing to advocate for myself, and I think, man, am I being rebellious at the moment? Then my conscience may not let me do it, right? And so
Yep.
you may have to
Hmm.
build that muscle of learning how to do that so that it's not so that I can when I do it and then I'm like, well, I'm actually not no, I'm not being rebellious. This is actually standing up for, my boundaries or whatever. And that
Hmm.
being, I guess, people are using that term always, gaslighting, right? They're talking about that term all the time, but just how it's so easy to allow um, our perception to be distorted and
Yeah.
been distorted for so long so that you can't know how much you're not willing to take up the amount of space that you ought to. Not as a way to take up more space than you should, but you're just kind of
Right.
shrinking yourself into this small box,
Hmm.
um, which is, I imagine it to be really difficult um, if you haven't seen examples. Which is why I feel like it's important to hear your voices, or
Hmm.
to, I mean, you hear to hear your own voice,
Right.
right, and to recognize that others want to hear your voice, but then also hear other embolden others to hear their voices.
Hmm.
Because like you're saying, if we're conditioned to think of that as very prideful or very um, and I'm not saying swing all the way to American individualism, everyone just clamors for their own
Oh
thing,
God, no, no.
but perhaps a level of, yeah, maybe we just need to I don't know, come into the middle, I don't know.
Well, I do want to, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but I think just being an Asian woman, the fetishes that come from that, and I don't know if I've internalized that fetish in terms of like looking at myself. I mean, that's just something I experienced throughout my life. But it's interesting how I view myself in terms of being a candidate in romantic relationships, right? So I'm like, well, I'm not Asian enough for Asian men. And I remember having conversations about this where a lot of Asian men I meet, they really want to be with a white woman. And that's just flat out how it is. It's kind of like, well, I mean, you're not in the running. And then with a non-Asian person, it's like, do you like me for me, or do you like me because I'm this like exotic, different woman? And so that's always been something in the back of my mind. I'm sure unconsciously, subconscious most of the time, when I'm interacting with men. But it's just like I think about the media, I think about like I'll never forget. It's just little things, right? Like two incidences. In high school, I dated a guy and he was like, yeah, like dating Asian women, isn't that like the latest thing? And I
Oh,
was like, you're right. I was like, you're right. I'm like a Fendi purse. I'm like the latest thing. And that's when I was like 16.
he said that to you when he was dating you?
Yeah, he said that to me. Yeah. It just shows you my low self-esteem back then. And then more recently, this was maybe a couple years ago, I was just at a store, just buying something, you know. This guy goes, are you Chinese? And I'm like, here we go. I'm like, yes, I'm Chinese. And he goes on for like 5 minutes about how great Chinese women are. They love family and they can cook. And I just stood there and I was like, okay, can I just have my like purchase? But it just shows like how deep that like mentality goes. And
Hmm.
the fact that he felt like he could just say that, I'm like, you don't know me from the next person. So I know that's really affected my self-perception when it comes down to interacting with men in general.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I felt for that. And when I became aware that it seems like this guy's, yeah, you're saying fetish. I mean, his something to do with his sexual, um, desires and his,
mhm.
uh, man, that explicitly leading to violence against, Asian women, and how part of that was related to his being conditioned to have this sexualized, uncontrollably sexualized way of viewing Asian women.
Yep, absolutely.
Um, you know, I know that women in general oftentimes feel that, but,
Mhm.
I think it becomes really difficult if you're out there and you just imagine how are these people viewing me? um,
I think that all the time. I think, I may not even be aware of it, but like I'm super I guess I am aware of it, but it's just there all the time. All that it's like, well, especially now with like everything happening,
yeah,
I'm like, okay, am I a target? Like, are you looking at me because you're just looking at me? Or are you like, you know what I mean? There's all these thoughts. And I know for myself, especially at my job, I don't want to say I feel like I need to represent and be a good Asian. Like I'm not, it's not so much of that, but there is a sense of like, well, I don't want to be a bad example,
mm,
because I mean, I'm the only Asian and I think my school has 9 buildings, but I'm the only Asian in my building, and they would have these diversity talks and I'm just like, what's up? And I would speak up, but it's just I feel like everywhere for me, right? It's always this very like implicit, subconscious, but super conscious, like I'm an Asian woman, and with all its implications. And it's there, and I know it's tiring. I know a lot of times it just feels very tiring and exhausting. But right now, that's just where I'm at. That's just where I'm at in my day to day life.
how do you feel? Actually, this is new, somewhat new territory. If you think about this, like, but I've been thinking about this as an Asian issue. I haven't seen women bring this up
Mm,
as a women's rights issue or like a women issue. And I
mhm.
sometimes wonder if it was all white women. I mean, I don't want to like play the race card in such a strong way. That's like if it
Right,
was white women, it would be like women's marches,
right,
Um, but it could be. I don't know. I mean, you need to bring that up and ask the question, right? I mean,
right.
um, because I don't see women. I don't see big advocacy surrounding the women's right. I mean, so I don't know what I'm trying to get to. Well, yeah, I mean, you as an Asian woman thinking about your relationship to other women or just women in general, this
Yeah.
how Asian women fit into that broader picture of
That is such a good question because I was like, I've been kind of thinking about this. Like, I don't have, I mean, I have, one of my best friends is Korean American. I mean, she's like my sister to me. And then, and then I would say I probably have two other good Asian, these are women, friends. But I was reflecting on how little we even talk to each other about these issues, like, or even how little I talk about women issues in general with my female friends. It's just not something that's like there. And that made me sad when I was thinking about that. I was like, there's a sadness there for me that there isn't more of those conversations of like a common experience, of something that it's not the same, but like there's commonalities in our experiences, and then I was thinking about like, you know, just my sense is, Asian, it's not monolithic. There's like how many countries in Asia, and I feel like, I mean, growing up, I felt this sense of division among Asians, right? Like, well, I'm Chinese, Korean, you kind of break it down, and there isn't this sense of like unity of Asian women. Like, we're all Asian. It's just more, because it's like historically, the Chinese and the Japanese, there are all kinds of issues there, and it's better now. But I think part of it is language too that unites people. So it's like I will never understand Korean unless I've learned.
right.
But I do feel like there's a lack of unity in terms of Asian women. I mean, at least in my life, I don't feel like that's something I see a
Right.
lot. And I wish there was, more of that sisterhood.
And maybe what I see when it comes to when I think about women is oftentimes the first people when they think about race, the first thing that I think some people think of is like certain stereotypical things, but also it's in the gaze of men, right? So it's
Mhm.
like black women. I don't even know what they are. Is it like the stereotype of like what like a the seductress kind of thing, or is it that one? I don't remember. Is it?
Well, I mean, black women, I mean, you hear songs about this all. They'll slash your tires, they'll burn down your house. Like
Oh, that kind of thing. Yeah, they're
you
really
know, that more, yeah.
or
Hmm.
like the Latina seductress kind of thing, or like the
Hmm.
Asian um, exotic
Oh,
stills
yeah.
that maybe the woman who always pleased their man kind of thing. And then, but with white women, I don't know what it is. I mean, maybe I'm not paying attention well enough, but I guess I just keep hearing like the sort of fragile princess that needs to be saved, I guess. And yeah, I don't know. So I don't even know how to think about women when it comes to relating to each other.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I have seen on a certain level, I do wonder when it comes to thinking about like pain tolerance. That's just one thing. Like, you keep hearing the language of white fragility, and I know that's a really complex. There's so much complexity
Right.
surrounding that stuff. There was a book written about it that it's kind of was a lot of people were promoting it, and now some people are criticizing it, and I haven't read it, but the concept, at least the general concept, and I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it seemed to make sense to me, certainly on a certain level of like, um, and I could be using this totally wrong, but like how it's very difficult. Like it's almost like for a lot of white people, you want to protect them, from like their from feeling uncomfortable,
Oh, I see what, yeah, 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 I see what you're saying.
especially for white women,
Mhm.
um, like when people talk about intersectionality, it's like white women, like white men, white women, like black women at the bottom is what it's
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
and it's like if they're fragile or if even bringing up something to do with race, like they get defensive and their tears is like, oh, don't get them to feel uncomfortable. um, anything but to get them feeling comfortable, you know.
Mhm.
But then on the flip side, when I think about Asian women, oftentimes I think about like, oh, they're just strong. Or
We
like,
just hold it down.
right, but that's not help. Like, or like
Yeah,
we'll have the strong black woman stereotype, right?
right,
Which even if that were on average more true, I'm not saying that it is, but
right.
I don't know. I mean, just even exploring, could it be that, you know, socialization over, or like, you know, having to survive over time, whatever, builds more, or builds more resilience. I don't know.
Yeah,
But even if, I mean, yeah, even if there were any statistical things that make it more strong in general, but like to have such a strong stereotype, even if it's viewed as a positive thing that you're not fragile,
yeah.
being harmful, because we need to be able to be weak, right?
I
Um,
mean, when you say that, I mean, the first thing I think of is the model minority stereotype. I think being Asian, I think that's one that it's a very difficult one for me, to be viewed as somehow the model minority. And with that comes the assumption, kind of like what you're saying, like we have it together, like we're super smart, like we're all just super good at math, and how, why complain because you're the model minority, and then there's all these privileges that come with that, and I think with that term comes a lack of awareness or not wanting to look at the struggles of Asians and Asian Americans, and I think that term just really like really upsets me, um because not only I'm sure I feel like I need to live up to it on some capacity, but then I mean I've heard this from other Asian people where it's like, where it's like, well, being Asian, I'm more privileged
yeah.
than a black person, or maybe even a Latino person. But we're not white, so we don't have white privilege, but we some have minority privilege, and I'm just like, but we all struggle, in terms of being a minority. So yeah, so of course people view it as positive. I think people who aren't Asian, they're usually like, oh my God, that's great, and I'm like, no, it actually carries a lot of negativity, for Asians with that term.
I think of it being as maybe there's not a strong cultural identity to live into right now. Like, I again, it's really, I'm not trying to compare in terms of like a sense of like, oh, pity us, but
Right. No, no, I get it.
for Black women, there is a sense of like, I think there's a lot of different kind of models for Black womanhood, and
Mm,
people are making it more complex you know, continue to make it
yeah.
more complex. I think I see that for Latino women, and maybe I could be wrong, you know, but I don't know if and this is my ignorance. I'm not saying there are none, but I don't know how you would see in terms of models for being an Asian woman, or
Yeah.
like what flag do you wave? You know what I mean? And are you guys supposed to become that? I don't know. It's just I'm asking that question, right? It is hard if you don't have lots of models or examples to follow.
Well, and that's just the thing because, and only like over the weekend when I was looking at Instagram for different, things, like there was one group that came up like AAPI women, like it was specifically about AAPI women. And I just was like, oh my God, this is so exciting, and there's a lot of activism stuff on there. And they talk a lot about, issues with Asian, but I'm like just starting to be exposed to that. Um, because I think for as long as till now, I never even had that thought in my mind, of what would it look like for Asian women to unite? Like it's just not even something that I've really ever thought about, like, but yeah, like what could come of that? Like what would we stand for? I guess is another question. Like it's women's rights, but then it's like, what are the Asian women? You know what I mean? Like I think it's just very complex. And I think in general, when I interact with Asian women, I don't feel like there's a sense of I need to be heard. I have a voice, like yeah, it's just not really a part of her
general.
psyche, you know?
Yeah, and maybe I'm not, and I don't know if we're saying that it has to get to this point where everybody's kind of with the bullhorn activist,
Oh, yeah, right.
but maybe making space for that thoughtful. I mean, it does strike me that I think that Asian American identity, Asian American female identity, Asian American male identity, Asian American identity in general is I'm I'm increasingly seeing how complex it is,
Mhm.
and it's inseparable from the broader racialization, the landscape of the United States.
Right.
Start with white, then black, then fill in the rest. Now we add this thing called brown, and then you know, Asian, created this term Asian American in history, which was out of activism, kind of to unite
Right.
those things. But it is a very, and then but then how it's kind of a hierarchy
Mhm.
implicitly people creating it, but like it's so complex to know when you're placed in those categories. You're put in certain boxes. How do we create pathways forward that make sense for everybody and that don't
Well,
hurt others in the process?
right.
We don't have to put other people down in the process of owning and becoming who we are, right?
I mean, I've always wondered for you as an Asian man, I mean, I'm sure you know all the stereotypes for an Asian man, and just
I don't, but I want to hear some of them. I mean, maybe I'll say one is uh we're sort of what's the word feminine
oh, like effeminate, was that the word? Yeah.
emasculated a little bit, yeah, not seen as
I
attractive.
I mean, well, the one that I have is like super inappropriate, especially if you're going to share this. So I'm going to keep that to myself. But
Okay.
like, I know this is like G rated, right? Because like Christians are going to watch this. So I'm not going to say that one. Um, but I think definitely the more, yeah, I think the effeminate one, kind of like, I even think about media. For the longest time, there weren't Asian male leads. It was always like, I don't really know the exact leads, but I think that always affected in some capacity like how I viewed Asian men. Somehow like they're not the prince, they're like the servant or something, or the butler or like whatever, and then you have the white prince. So I mean, somehow it's this sense of like not strong, not isn't gonna fight for you. Like I don't know, like all those type of
Right, whatever, and I, yeah, I think that's really important. I think that I'm looking forward to exploring that territory myself too.
right.
I think that
Mhm.
you know a suspicion I have. I mean, I think that a lot of people that end up being labeled the activists in any community tend to be the people that
Yeah,
already color outside the lines or have a certain sense of boldness
right.
to I don't care what people think of me, because you have to do that if
Mhm.
you want to kind of break out. You have to
Right.
know that people are going to, so you have to sort of not conform and do something different. And I know that on a certain level, I've both consciously and unconsciously done that, or tried to do it.
Mhm.
Partly because I don't want to just say, you said the Maldo minority thing. I don't want to just continue to pursue an upward mobility path or those kind of things. Uh,
Yeah.
so even already doing that within the broader Asian community, pursuing a different lifestyle, and then also trying to be a part of community development kind of efforts in Black
Mhm.
and brown um,
Yeah.
community, historically marginalized, oppressed,
Mhm.
and then the faith-based world too. I think that because of that, when you say male, Asian male, I'm not looking really. I don't think I'm looking to sort of Asian male. I don't see myself as really thinking about Asian male figures
Mm.
oftentimes as examples. And so, that's one thing. Another thing is I think I'm okay with sort of coloring outside the lines a little bit in terms of cultural
Yeah.
expectations surrounding how people look at men anyways.
Mhm.
Long hair, case in point, right? Not because I want to be like radical,
Right.
but because I do think there's a part of me that wants to make space for others.
Mm.
That maybe if you look at like a curve, this is like in the middle, this is the average, right? The bell's curve, and this is the average
Yeah.
person, but then on the edges, these are the
Mhm.
ones that maybe feel a little marginalized. I find myself oftentimes wanting to create space so that the people that are on the edges don't feel like I'm just not normal and nobody, wants me. But
Yeah. Right, right, right.
I'll,
Mhm.
well, I feel very comfortable in terms of maleness, and as a man, I would say, and a man, he, him, his, all those things.
Right, right, right.
I feel comfortable. Um, the idea, and this is something. There's internal resistance in me too for this, but I've pushed back on this in myself and others. The whole thing. Men aren't emotional. You know,
Oh,
I've intentionally cultivated this sense of like um, the Christian practice of lament, right? Of like grieving, or like that's like a weak showing weakness, right? Of
mm,
being there, where it's like it's okay to talk, it's good to talk about your feelings, that kind of stuff. And
yeah.
but that's what comes to my mind when you talk about masculinity, Asian masculinity. Some of that stuff comes into play. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's a lot to explore for for Asian men, especially because, like you're saying, there's those stereotypes already put on us. And how can we navigate the fact that they're put on us and not not accidentally live into them? Because sometimes we live into what the stereotypes, because that's what you define for me, so I'll stay in this box.
Well, I think one thing I've always appreciated about you, Jeremy, is you are so incredibly emotionally intelligent, and you really engage in meaningful, deep, conversations. And I think for me, you're probably the only Asian guy that like I've had these interactions with. I mean, just of course, right? Stereotypically, you think of like the Asian dad, right? And I think my dad actually is, if I was to go down, he's probably considered more emotional than like a really, what I mean, traditional Asian dad. I mean, I've seen him cry and stuff like that. So, but that's really all I've been around. I haven't really been around your generation or our generation of Asian men. I mean, I don't really know. So I think when I first started to interact with you, I was like, wow, he's like really emotionally intelligent and available. I was like, it was like amazing. I was
Hmm.
like, wow, okay. And I think it just goes to show, like you said, you really intentionally cultivated
Yeah.
that,
I mean,
and it's like,
I'm gonna credit Jesus with that. I mean, hey, Holy Spirit helping you grow as a
mm-hmm,
man. But I
mm-hmm.
do think it takes the work to go against the grain of, I don't know what it is. Is it an Asian cultural ingraining? Is it a male? Is it
Yeah,
a Christian
for
male?
sure.
Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing I imagine also for Asian femininity, and it's,
Yep.
there's so much here, right? And I feel for, well, I hope that in in it always seems to be reaction to the cultural moment where it's so intense, but I just hope
Yeah.
the
Yep.
conversations can be um, sort of more open in times when it's
Mm-hmm.
not intense, when it's just normal life,
Right.
like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes maybe because highlighting an aspect of who you are as a person, and always anytimes, perhaps if we're not used to it, it can feel like you're venturing into new territory, and it can be awkward, right? um like,
Yeah.
especially if you're not different for it. Yuan, I'm curious, as a woman, how do you feel? Like, because I've noticed that you are, this way and that way, just that kind of stuff.
Right.
I guess unless you're intentionally doing it, where in the intentionality, we already know this is what we're gonna do. It's not awkward.
Yeah.
But just maybe normal. I just think I like that word, normalizing a certain way of caring for each other that makes it not awkward to um, talk about life in these ways, right?
Right. And I think it's not even the whole idea of like normalizing. I think if we were to really do that for each other, like we would all feel less alone.
Mm,
We would all feel like for me, I don't think I ever get asked anything about me being an Asian woman. There's just no, I don't know, I guess I'm just me, right? There's no like space, there's no, and it's like I would have to really put myself in very specific spaces to even have those conversations. And I get it. Like I don't sit there and ask my friend, how do you feel as a white woman? Like I would love to have those conversations, but I think it'd be super uncomfortable. I know that I've had those type of conversations with Black women, when I've had good friends that I feel like I can just ask these things. Um, but on a day-to-day basis, I feel very alone as an Asian woman. There's just nothing with it.
Which is this is the another word is the word that people keep using, invisible, right?
Mhm.
Or I would say unseen,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
because we need to feel seen. And I mean, yeah, well, I hope that Asian women can become more valued. I obviously that I mean, my wife is Asian woman. uh,
Right.
I value Asian women. I want to increasingly value, and to the extent that I myself have been shaped unconsciously by a sense of like, well, our Asian women are just strong and kind of just talk
Mm,
through in a
mm,
way that maybe there was something to it, because they did do that, but in a way that becomes unhelpful because not allowing for weakness. I want to allow that to come to the surface and then like be aware of it, name it, so that I can let that dissipate for the sake of
yeah,
humanizing our sisters and brothers together.
yeah.
And um, yeah, that's my commitment. I mean, I always want to see men listen to women better. I was gonna say the other way around, women listen to men better, but we probably don't need that. Let's just focus on men listening
I
to.
mean, we try, it's like
Probably don't need to emphasize more women listening to men better, but definitely I'm
right.
emphasize men listening to women better.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so this is a cultural moment where Asian women, I really want to hear and provide this space.
Yeah. I'm really encouraged by that because, a lot of times I think about being Asian, right? Like, because that's what I look like. But I think that I really don't think a lot about being an Asian woman. I was explaining this the other day to somebody. I was like, I spent a big chunk of my life investing in the Christian identity, right? Like, what does it mean to be a believer, a Christian? And it was like Asian was like secondary, woman was maybe below that, versus like a cohesive, comprehensive, identity. Um, did that for a very, very long time. And it didn't work, obviously, for various reasons. And so now it's like, okay, so how do I integrate all those pieces of me, but also in a very I don't even know the term, non-conforming way, a non, and that was very lonely for a while, where I felt like I just lost everything. But now I feel like I'm at a much better place where it's like I feel more grounded and confident
Right.
in like who I am. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that becomes part of connected to the sort of problematic way we view what it means to, like, there's a faith part of me that's some part of my brain, you know, all that
right.
with like the right religion and put Jesus in there or something like that.
Yep. Hmm.
That has to be first. People say
Yeah.
your faith identity has to be first, but I don't know necessarily see it as a competition. I see it as what it's more like. How do I take the gift God has given me as an Asian man, and take that gift and sort of steward my gifts in a way that is blessing
Right.
to other people and it lives out faithfully before
Mhm.
God and other
Right.
people. And so, in that sense, I don't have to ask which identity is primary.
Right.
Like, I even separate out my being male, my being Asian, my being I can only just say I am this person
Right.
like this,
Right.
that feels this way, and it is as this person that I want to let the Spirit of God fill me and live and discern and process what it looks like to participate in this world in a way that cares for the vulnerable, loves others. It's you as an Asian woman. I can't stop. If I think about Yuan, I can't think about you separate from your Asianness. I can't think about you separate from your being a woman.
Right, and I mean, I felt pretty early on when I was a believer, became a believer, I was like, God made me an Asian woman. Like, I'm not an accident. It wasn't just like, oh, like, let's just randomly make her, And so I remember early on in my faith, I was like, well, why? Like, what's the purpose? Like, why? I could have been anything. Um, and I don't exactly know, but I do think that part of that is putting myself or being in spaces where there's minimal Asians, and not to say to represent, I mean, nothing like that, but I feel like that's been the thread of my life. And I feel like there's a purpose in that. There's probably a bigger, than I even really am aware of, and I thought a lot about this with my family, like, why did God have me born into the family that I was born into? And so I think I've always kind of seen like a connection there, like a purpose behind it. I don't have an answer, but I am very aware that out of anything he could have made me, this was the one he chose, and so why is that? So
Yeah, and if I understand, if my calling, if I am a follower of Jesus, is
mhm.
partly to discern in time what my story, how does my story, which is inescapably related to my history,
Yeah.
related to the cultural heritage, and then even just my family story, and then my individual story. How do I live out this story as a unique um, way of like our stories are supposed to reflect Jesus' story, right? So a unique instance of the love of Christ in this in being imitators of Christ. So our story should have some reflection of Jesus. So what does it look like for my story to sort of be transformed by the story of God, by the story of Christ, and our unique stories, not just
Hmm.
a generic one, uniquely
Right.
shaped by me being an Asian man,
Hmm.
you being an Asian woman,
Right.
and then add on to all the layers where we feel called to be in these spaces where we have very few others that look like us and have our
Hmm.
stories,
Yeah.
and how to sit in those spaces in a way that um, may be uncomfortable, but maybe we're called to sit in that tension, to end up making space for others, right?
Yeah.
Stories, because I feel for you right now, because it doesn't seem like you're it doesn't seem like it's laborious. I'll say it that way. It's laborious to because you brought up coworkers and people around you that maybe is like, I don't see you as Asian woman,
Right.
and it's laborious. I mean, it's not always. I'm not saying you always have to represent always, but
Right.
laborious to discern when should I help people better understand my story and who I am, not just for your own sake, but for their sake, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yep.
so yeah, this is tricky. This is tricky territory, that we're all living into. Yeah, I mean, is there any last like thoughts or hopes that, from your Asian women perspective,
Yeah.
something that you're looking at, someone that you're learning from, that you'd love to share, or even
I mean,
doesn't have
my
to
thing,
be a conclusion. It could be something you're still processing too, a question.
for sure. I think for me, I've been really wanting to just study more about Asian American history in America. I think that'll help me a lot as with my processing. So I just started this book. I think it's called The Asian American Dream or something, it's very historical, which has been very painful to kind of see just Asians in America. I mean, I don't, in terms of hopes, I'm not sure. I'm not hopeless, because I'm always a very hopeful person. I think my main hope is just that we as Asian Americans or Asians will just no longer be silent, because I think that's generations, that's been historical, and I do feel this call, and I'm not saying that I should be out there on the, like marching every day, but I do feel this call to speak up in some capacity, and I'm not sure what that is. I think right now the way that I've been doing it is just people that I trust to just even say, like, I'm still very deeply wounded, by what happened, and not just letting it be a blurb on the news. I am kind of like seeking and searching for ways that I can get involved. And so if you hear of anything, I feel like Jeremy, you hear everything. So like if you hear of anything, I definitely
Yeah, for sure.
would be interested in that. I was really sad that I missed the Chinatown vigil they had. I didn't even know they had one until that day, and that I couldn't attend. And I felt like that would have been so healing for me to just be a part of that with other allies, in that situation. Yeah, so I think really just for us to keep using our voices, and value our voices and value our history, and it's okay to show grief and mourn about it, because I know it's like we shouldn't show a lot of emotions, not that I ever followed that, but so yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing makes an impact, just talking to different people about it and having people listen to other people's stories.
You think
Um,
how do you think your parents, if they watched this, how do you think
oh my God. I don't know. I think my dad would be like, what?
maybe that's a thing. Maybe share this with your parents. I mean,
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Just to even share it with my dad. I'm not sure about my mom, but
yeah,
my dad. And I think it's simply because it's like we just don't have these it's not at all a norm in our family,
yeah.
to talk about these
Who
things.
knows what that can lead to? Who knows what the some starting some open lines of communication, you know?
Yeah, I might just send it to him, just like, hey, dad, if you're interested, take
It's a
a
little
look.
awkward, but you know, I just, man, I have to share this. This is
Yeah.
Asian American experience, right? Uh, you know, I love you. And when our white friends say "I love you" to their kids, it's just like so common. But
Yeah.
when my parents started doing that, they were taught by a Chinese Christian retreat, some workshop where they told them, "Tell your kids I love you." Let's practice it. And they actually practiced it at that workshop where some one person mimicked being the child. And I'll say on the receiving end when they did that, I felt so awkward. I felt so awkward.
Yeah.
And I'm still. I mean, I can do it now. They'll say it on the phone. I can say it back. I mean, it's still a little. It's just residual. Like even though theoretically, like, oh no, we love each other. We should say that. So there's all this stuff we gotta continue to work on. Obviously.
Yeah. I mean, my dad told me he loved me for the first time ever when I was on a trip in Europe in high school, and he wrote it in a fax back when they had fax machines, and he faxed it to the hotel, and I read it and I started to cry. I was like, my dad loves me. What? I'll never forget that. Like, I'll never forget when that happened.
And I'm sure there's other cultures where they show versus speak, tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, for
No,
sure.
I'm curious over time to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
'Cause, you said you want to read. I mean, I finished one today. It was a recommendation from, Dr. Lee, Q Bomb Lee. He read it recently,
Yeah.
and he told me about it, and I was like, I gotta get my hands on this. And but it was powerful. It was very powerful. This book called Minor Feelings. It's,
Oh, I
it's
saw that on Amazon. Okay.
not too long,
Uh-huh.
and it's very like I don't know how to describe it. It's like self-conscious narration of this person's journey. Uh,
Yeah.
and she's like a poet, uh, Asian American female poet, Kathy Parkong. So, anyways, it's a recommendation. I mean, it's not faith based. There's some edgy stuff that some people will find objectionable, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was. I mean, yes, it's like you're saying. You see something mirrored to you. You're not aware that it's just like I've never seen it described this way in my experience.
Right.
That's so
Yeah.
to put a
Yeah.
mirror in my soul is so healing, you know.
It is.
Oh, anyways. Well, anyways, this is really fun. I honestly, in certain way, I hesitate to say fun because the occasion is so terrible, but I hope that brings some light out of the darkness.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you asked me. Like, I felt honored that you wanted to hear my story and my experiences. And like, I was actually kind of nervous. I was like, dear God, I hope I like, I mean,
You're so interesting. I mean, I bet if you keep sharing with other people, I bet, or think of it this way, I think there's more layers that will be unearthed because your story is very different.
yeah,
It's not gonna it's gonna, I think it will unravel things for other people too. So
mm,
anyways, that's my recommendation.
yeah.
What's the word? Uh,
Suggestion?
Suggestion. Yeah, suggestion. Yes. But hey, thanks for this. Maybe I really I feel it's appropriate because to kind of benediction it, sort of ask for the Lord's blessing in this continued journey.
Sure. Yeah.
So may God bless us as we um, seek to be filled with His Spirit, with your Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus,
Yep.
to live out and discover in some ways our identities that are ultimately taken up into our identity as beloved children of God. And as we explore how to be fully who we are,
Yeah.
in a way that honors others as well. So um, we ask these kind of things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Jeremy, you and I have to catch up sometime. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, oh my God, I want to just like catch up,
We'll make that happen.